Sergeant Marcus Chen felt the cold metal of the crashed shuttle pressing against his back as he tried to slow his breathing. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage around his left thigh, and his right arm hung useless at his side. The distress beacon had been transmitting for 3 days now, but no rescue ship had appeared on the horizon of this desolate moon. The alien forest around him buzzed with strange sounds. Crystalline trees caught the light of the distant blue sun, casting rainbow patterns across the purple soil. Everything here seemed hostile, from the acid-spitting plants to the six-legged predators that howled in the distance during the long nights. Marcus had been part of the diplomatic mission to the Kepler system when pirates attacked their convoy. His shuttle had taken a direct hit, killing the pilot instantly and sending them spiraling toward this unnamed moon. He was the sole survivor of a crew of 8, stranded on a world that appeared on no human star charts. The sound of approaching footsteps made him grip his plasma rifle tighter, despite knowing he only had 2 shots left in the power cell. Through the twisted metal of the shuttle door, he saw a figure approaching. Not human, that much was certain. The being moved with a graceful gait, standing nearly 7 feet tall with elongated limbs and pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the alien sunlight. Marcus raised his weapon, but something stopped him from firing. The alien carried no visible weapons. Instead, it held what appeared to be a container of some kind and moved with deliberate, non-threatening steps. As it drew closer, Marcus could see more details. The being was clearly female, with delicate features and large, dark eyes that reflected an intelligence he recognized. She stopped about 10 feet from the wreckage and spoke in a melodic language he couldn't understand. Her voice carried no aggression, only what seemed like concern. When Marcus didn't respond, she pointed to his wounds and then to the container she carried. The meaning was clear enough. Trust had gotten Marcus into trouble before, but bleeding out alone on an alien world seemed like a worse fate than whatever this creature might have planned. He lowered his weapon slightly and nodded. The alien approached slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. Up close, Marcus could see the intricate patterns that decorated her skin, almost like tattoos, but somehow natural. She knelt beside him and opened the container, revealing what looked like medical supplies. Without warning, she began examining his wounds with gentle but skilled hands. The pain medication she applied worked faster than anything in human pharmacology. Within minutes, Marcus felt the burning agony in his leg subside to a manageable throb. She worked in silence, cleaning the wound and applying what appeared to be some kind of biosynthetic mesh that began bonding with his tissue immediately. As she worked on his arm, Marcus studied her face. There was something familiar about her expression, something universally recognizable. Grief. The way she touched his wounds, the careful attention she paid to his pain, it reminded him of how his own mother had tended to his childhood injuries. This alien was no stranger to caring for the wounded. When she finished, she sat back on her heels and spoke again in her musical language. This time she pointed to herself and said what sounded like Zara. Marcus understood and pointed to his own chest. "Marcus," he said, his voice hoarse from dehydration. Zara nodded and stood, walking back toward the forest. For a moment, Marcus thought she was leaving him, but she turned and gestured for him to follow. Every instinct told him this was dangerous, but she had just saved his life when she could have easily taken it. Standing was difficult, but the treatment had given him enough mobility to walk. Marcus gathered his few remaining supplies and followed Zara into the alien forest. She moved with confidence through paths that were invisible to his human eyes, occasionally stopping to let him rest when his injuries slowed him down. They walked for nearly an hour before reaching a clearing where a small dwelling sat nestled between 2 massive crystal formations. The structure was organic in design, seeming to grow from the ground rather than being built upon it. Soft, bioluminescent panels provided gentle lighting, and Marcus could see that the interior was both functional and beautiful. Zara led him inside and gestured to a raised platform covered in soft material. Marcus understood this to be a bed and gratefully sank down onto it. The exhaustion hit him all at once, and he realized he hadn't slept properly since the crash. As his eyes adjusted to the dim interior lighting, Marcus noticed details that told him about Zara's life. There were 2 sets of everything, from eating utensils to clothing. Pictures lined one wall, showing Zara with another member of her species, a male with similar features but broader shoulders. In several images, they stood together in what was clearly a ceremony of some kind. The past tense nature of the display became clear when Marcus noticed the memorial corner. Alien writing covered a crystalline tablet, and fresh flowers sat beneath what could only be a funeral marker. Zara was a widow, living alone and maintaining a shrine to her lost partner. She brought Marcus food that tasted strange but nourishing, along with water that had been purified through methods he couldn't identify. As he ate, she sat across from him and began speaking in her language, occasionally pointing to objects around the room. Marcus realized she was trying to teach him basic words. Over the next several hours, they managed to establish rudimentary communication. Marcus learned that Zara's species was called the Villani, and that this moon was their ancestral home, though most had left for the inner planets generations ago. She had chosen to stay, maintaining the old ways and caring for the sacred crystal groves. Her husband had died in an accident while working in the deep caves beneath the forest. She had been alone for 2 of their years, which Marcus calculated as roughly 3 Earth years. The loneliness in her eyes was something any human could recognize and understand. As the alien day cycle ended, Marcus found himself wondering how this encounter would change both their lives. Zara had shown him kindness when she could have shown him death. In the growing darkness of the alien night, with strange sounds echoing through the crystal forest, Marcus felt safer than he had since the crash. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in days, he would sleep without fear of predators or exposure. The alien widow had given him something more valuable than medical treatment or shelter. She had given him hope that he might survive long enough to see home again. Marcus closed his eyes and listened to Zara moving quietly around her home, preparing for the night cycle. Her presence was comforting in a way he hadn't expected. Perhaps loneliness was truly universal, and perhaps kindness was the bridge that could span the vast distances between species. The last thing he remembered before sleep took him was the soft sound of Zara's voice, speaking in her musical language. Though he couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable. She was singing a lullaby, the same type of gentle song mothers and caregivers had sung to their young across countless worlds and species. In the morning, Marcus would begin to learn just how much this alien widow was willing to sacrifice to help a stranger from the stars. But for now, he slept peacefully in the home of someone who understood that even the smallest acts of compassion could light up the darkest corners of the universe. Marcus woke to the sound of melodic chiming outside Zara's dwelling. Through the translucent walls, he could see the alien sunrise painting the crystal trees in brilliant shades of amber and gold. His wounds felt significantly better, though his arm still ached with every movement. Zara was already awake, preparing what appeared to be a morning meal. She had changed into different clothing, a flowing garment that seemed to shift colors as she moved. When she noticed Marcus stirring, she offered him a warm smile and gestured toward a basin of water she had prepared for washing. After the simple meal of fruits and grains that tasted surprisingly familiar, Zara led Marcus outside. In the daylight, he could see that her home was part of a larger complex of structures, all appearing to be abandoned except for hers. The crystal formations around them hummed with a low frequency that Marcus could feel in his bones. Zara began showing him around what had once been a thriving settlement. Through gestures and the few words they had managed to share, she explained that her people had lived here for thousands of years, before gradually migrating to the more developed worlds in the system. The crystal groves required constant tending, but most Villani had lost interest in the old traditions. They walked through gardens where impossible plants grew in geometric patterns, their roots somehow drawing energy directly from the crystalline structures. Zara demonstrated how to tend them, showing Marcus which ones needed water and which ones fed on the mineral deposits that seeped from the living rock. As they worked together, Marcus began to understand the scope of what Zara was trying to preserve. This wasn't just her home. It was a living museum of her people's heritage. The crystal formations weren't just beautiful, they were alive in some way, growing and changing according to patterns that had taken millennia to establish. The work was difficult for someone with Marcus's injuries, but Zara was patient. When he struggled with tasks that required two hands, she would quietly step in to help without making him feel useless. Her consideration went beyond mere kindness. It spoke to a deep understanding of what it meant to be vulnerable and dependent on others. During their lunch break, Zara activated what appeared to be a communication device. The crystalline panel came alive with symbols that shifted and flowed like living text. Marcus watched as she sent messages, presumably to other Villani settlements. Her expression grew troubled as she read the responses. Through careful questioning and drawing pictures in the dirt, Marcus learned that Zara had been trying to arrange for his rescue. The responses she received were not encouraging. The Villani had strict non-interference policies with other species, especially humans, who had a reputation for being aggressive and unpredictable. More concerning was the news that human military ships had been spotted in the outer system. The diplomatic convoy attack had apparently triggered a search and rescue operation, but the human fleet was being viewed as a potential threat by the Villani government. Any alien found harboring a human could be charged with violating interspecies protocols. Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He had been so grateful for Zara's help that he hadn't considered the consequences she might face. If her own people discovered that she was sheltering him, she could be arrested or exiled from the system entirely. He tried to communicate that he would leave, that he wouldn't put her at risk, but Zara shook her head firmly. Through gestures and expressions, she made it clear that sending him back into the wilderness would be a death sentence. His wounds were healing, but he was still far from capable of surviving on his own. That afternoon, Zara began teaching Marcus practical skills for life on the moon. She showed him which plants were edible, how to find clean water, and how to read the patterns in the crystal formations that indicated weather changes. It became clear that she was preparing him for the possibility that he might need to survive independently. But as evening approached, Zara made a decision that surprised Marcus completely. She led him to a hidden chamber beneath her dwelling, accessible only through a concealed passage behind her memorial shrine. The underground space was larger than her home above, filled with ancient artifacts and technology that hummed with quiet power. This was the real heart of the settlement, Zara explained through their growing shared vocabulary. The crystal groves above were just the visible portion of a vast network that extended deep underground. The Villani had built their civilization around these living formations, learning to work with them rather than imposing their will upon them. Zara activated several control panels, causing the chamber to come alive with soft light and gentle vibrations. She showed Marcus archives containing thousands of years of Villani history, scientific data about the crystal networks, and most importantly, detailed maps of underground passages that extended for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. The implication was clear. If Marcus needed to hide from both human search parties and Villani authorities, the underground networks could provide shelter for months or even years. But Zara wasn't just showing him an escape route, she was offering to teach him everything he would need to know to survive down there. Over the following days, they established a routine. Mornings were spent tending the crystal groves, maintaining the careful balance that kept the living formations healthy. Afternoons were devoted to lessons in the underground chambers, where Zara shared the knowledge her people had accumulated over millennia. Marcus proved to be a quick learner, and Zara seemed to enjoy having someone to teach. There had been sadness in her eyes since her husband's death, but as she shared her people's knowledge with an eager student, some of that sadness began to lift. The underground networks were vast and complex, connecting not just the abandoned settlements on this moon, but extending to other worlds in the system. The crystals could transmit information across interstellar distances instantaneously, making them valuable beyond measure. Marcus began to understand why the Vallani were so protective of their ancestral technologies. But with understanding came a new concern. If human forces discovered the true nature of the crystal networks, they would want to study them, possibly exploit them. The peaceful Vallani would be powerless to stop a determined human military operation. Marcus found himself in the position of knowing secrets that could either doom or save both species. Zara sensed his inner conflict, and one evening as they sat watching the alien stars through the transparent dome of the underground chamber, she spoke to him in careful, halting human words she had been learning. "Marcus," she said, her accent making his name sound like music, "you choose. Your people, my people, both safe, possible." The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like a physical burden. Zara had saved his life, shared her knowledge, and offered him sanctuary. In return, he found himself holding the future of two civilizations in his hands. The communication device chimed softly, indicating another message from the Vallani authorities. Zara read it carefully, her expression growing more troubled with each symbol. She turned to Marcus and spoke in their shared vocabulary of words and gestures. The human fleet had requested permission to search the moon for survivors. The Vallani government had agreed, but only if any humans found were immediately turned over to their own people. The search would begin at sunrise, and it would be thorough. Marcus looked around the underground chamber that had become both classroom and sanctuary. Tomorrow he would have to make a choice that would affect not just his own fate, but the future relationship between humanity and the Vallani. Zara had given him the knowledge to make that choice wisely, but she couldn't make it for him. As the alien night deepened around them, Marcus realized that the wounded soldier who had crashed on this moon was gone forever. In his place sat someone who understood that true strength wasn't measured in weapons or military might, but in the wisdom to know when to fight and when to seek a better path. Zara had taught him more than just survival skills or alien technology. She had shown him what it meant to care for something larger than himself, to preserve knowledge and beauty for future generations, and to offer kindness to strangers who might not deserve it. Tomorrow would bring the test of whether a human soldier could prove worthy of the trust an alien widow had placed in him. The human search ships appeared at dawn, their metallic hulls stark against the crystal-bright sky. Marcus watched from the underground chamber as 3 military shuttles descended toward the surface, their sensors sweeping the abandoned settlement in methodical patterns. His heart pounded as he recognized the markings of the 7th Fleet, his own unit. Zara stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. She had spent the night teaching him the final protocols for the Crystal Network, showing him how to send messages that would reach the Vallani homeworld in seconds rather than months. The knowledge felt like fire in his mind, too important and too dangerous for any one person to carry alone. "Still time to hide," Zara said in her carefully learned human words. "Underground safe. You live long time here with me." Marcus turned to look at her, seeing the hope and fear warring in her large dark eyes. She had offered him everything, a new life, safety, companionship, and a chance to help preserve wonders that humanity had never imagined. But she had also taught him about duty, about protecting things more precious than individual lives. No, Marcus said softly. It's time to choose the harder path. He activated the crystal communication array with the sequence Zara had taught him, feeling the living network respond to his touch. The message he composed was careful. Using formal diplomatic language he hoped would reach the right people on both sides. To the Villani Council, he identified himself as Sergeant Marcus Chen, survivor of the diplomatic convoy attack, and formally requested asylum consideration under interstellar law. More importantly, he offered to serve as a cultural liaison, sharing what he had learned about human intentions and Villani capabilities. To the human search teams, he sent his location and status, along with a request that any rescue operation include proper diplomatic personnel. He emphasized that he had been given sanctuary by local inhabitants who deserved protection and respect under established first contact protocols. The responses came quickly. The Villani Council was intrigued by his proposal, particularly his suggestion that limited cultural exchange might benefit both species. The human search teams were simply relieved to find him alive and demanded his immediate extraction. Marcus looked at the competing demands and made his choice. He would surrender to the human search team, but only after ensuring that Zara's sacrifice was properly recognized and protected. Together they climbed back to the surface as the human shuttles settled in the clearing outside Zara's home. Marcus could see armed soldiers deploying around the perimeter, their weapons ready despite the obvious lack of threat. Their training had prepared them for hostile contact, not for gentle widows who tended crystal gardens. Captain Sarah Morrison was the first to reach them, her relief obvious despite her professional demeanor. Marcus had served under her command before the diplomatic mission, and he could see her calculating the best way to extract him safely. "Sergeant Chen," Morrison said, her voice carrying across the clearing. "Are you injured? Have you been harmed?" "I'm alive because of her," Marcus replied, gesturing to Zara, who stood quietly beside him. "Captain, I need to request formal first contact protocols. This is Zara of the Villani people, and she has provided medical treatment and sanctuary under interstellar law." Morrison's expression shifted as she realized the complexity of the situation. First contact protocols were rarely invoked, and they required specific procedures that most military personnel were barely familiar with. She activated her communication array and began requesting instructions from higher command. While they waited, Marcus introduced Zara to the human soldiers with all the ceremony he could manage. He explained her status as a cultural guardian and emphasized the sacred nature of the crystal groves. Several soldiers lowered their weapons as they began to understand that they were standing in something equivalent to a cathedral or museum. The response from human command came with surprising speed. Admiral Patricia Hawkins herself joined the communication link, her holographic image appearing above Morrison's portable projector. Marcus had heard of the Admiral, known for her diplomatic skills as much as her military record. "Sergeant Chen," Admiral Hawkins said, studying both Marcus and Zara through the projection. "Your situation reports have reached the highest levels of government. I'm authorized to inform you that formal diplomatic contact has been approved, contingent on your assessment of Villani intentions." Marcus felt the weight of history settling around them. This moment would be remembered by both species for centuries to come. He looked at Zara, who watched the proceedings with calm dignity, despite not understanding the human language being spoken. "Admiral," Marcus said carefully, "the Villani are peaceful people with technologies we can barely comprehend. They've lived in this system for thousands of years and have no aggressive intentions toward humanity. However, they're also protective of their cultural sites and scientific knowledge." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Zara has shared knowledge with me that could revolutionize human understanding of faster-than-light communication. But she's also shown me that some things are more valuable than technological advancement. The trust she placed in a wounded stranger should be honored, not exploited." Admiral Hawkins nodded slowly. Understood, Sergeant. Stand by for the arrival of our diplomatic team. They'll be there within 6 hours. The wait that followed was tense but revealing. Morrison's soldiers explored the settlement with growing wonder as Zara led guided tours, showing them the crystal formations and demonstrating how the living structures responded to touch and sound. The humans' obvious appreciation for the beauty around them seemed to please Zara, and she began teaching them simple words in her musical language. When the diplomatic team arrived, led by Ambassador Elena Rodriguez, the first formal contact ceremony was conducted with all the dignity both species could manage. Zara produced formal robes from her dwelling, transforming herself into an obvious representative of her people's ancient traditions. The negotiations that followed established the framework for future relations between humanity and the Vallani. Marcus found himself serving as translator, not just of language but of cultural concepts, helping both sides understand the other's motivations and concerns. The Vallani agreed to limited technological exchange in return for guarantees that their cultural sites would be protected and that any human presence in the system would be strictly regulated. The crystal networks would remain under Vallani control, but selected human scientists could study them under careful supervision. For humanity, it meant access to communication technologies that would revolutionize space exploration and colonization. For the Vallani, it meant an end to their isolation and the possibility of sharing their accumulated wisdom with a younger but vigorous species. But the most significant outcome was personal. Zara formally requested that Marcus be assigned as the permanent human liaison to the crystal settlements. The Vallani Council had been impressed by his respect for their ways and his willingness to learn rather than simply demand. Marcus accepted the assignment, knowing that it meant leaving his old life behind entirely. He would become something new, neither fully human nor Vallani, but a bridge between two worlds that needed each other more than either realized. As the diplomatic teams departed and the crystal moon settled back into its ancient rhythms, Marcus found himself alone with Zara once again. But the loneliness that had driven them together had been transformed into something else, a shared purpose that gave meaning to both their lives. They walked through the crystal groves as the alien sunset painted the sky in impossible colors. Zara had taught Marcus that the formations grew not just according to mineral deposits and environmental conditions, but in response to the care and attention they received. Love, she had explained, was a force that shaped reality at the quantum level. "You stay now," Zara said, her human vocabulary growing stronger every day. "Help me tend the lights. Teach your people about growing things instead of taking things." Marcus nodded, feeling something settle in his chest that he hadn't realized was broken. He had come to this moon as a wounded soldier, crashed and bleeding and alone. He was leaving as something unprecedented in human history, a guardian of wonders that existed at the intersection of science and spirit. The crystal network hummed around them as they walked, carrying messages between worlds at speeds that defied physics. But the most important message needed no technology to transmit. It had passed between a wounded stranger and a grieving widow through simple acts of kindness, proving that compassion was truly the universal language. Years later, when human children learned about the first contact with the Vallani, they would hear about the technological marvels and the diplomatic breakthroughs. But they would also hear about Sergeant Marcus Chen, who learned that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquest, but from surrender, not from taking, but from giving, not from standing alone, but from choosing to trust a stranger who offered healing in the darkness. In the end, Marcus had never needed rescue. He had needed transformation, and he had found it in the hands of an alien widow who understood that broken things could be made beautiful again if they were tended with enough care and patience. Together, they had planted seeds that would grow into a future neither species could have achieved alone.